you, Dyke.
Number one, sir.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today. This evening I hope to have an audience of Her Majesty the Queen.
Mr. Dykes!
Can I thank my right honourable friend for that question? Would she confirm that the last remaining obstacle to early British entry into the exchange rate mechanism is the present temporary higher rate of inflation?
My honourable friend is not quite right in view of the statement made at Madrid and repeated by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He will know that it's absolutely vital we have free movement of capital throughout the community, and that is not yet satisfied. That is one factor, and then we must get our own rate of inflation down and have proper competition throughout the community.
Mr. Kinnock!
Mr. Speaker, isn't it evident from the Prime Minister's reply that she just gave that she has absolutely no serious intention of joining the exchange rate mechanism for as long as she survives?
No, Mr. Speaker, not in the least. I stand by the statement we made at Madrid. I was not able to join the exchange rate mechanism during my first decade. I hope to do so during my second.
Mr. Speaker, doesn't she agree with the view expressed by her former Chancellor last night, that Britain's non-membership of the exchange rate mechanism is an exposed flank? And as a result, isn't that clear that last night that she was savaged by a live scapegoat?
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure my right honourable friend will be the first. I'm sure my right honourable friend... My right honourable friend, the former Chancellor, would be the first to agree on the need to get inflation down, and that is top priority.
Order! Order! Mr. Kinnock!
So will the Prime Minister tell us whether she believes that the current pace, to use the phrase of the right honourable gentleman, is too leisurely?
I reaffirm what I said at Madrid and what I've said in my two previous answers. We are committed to join the exchange rate mechanism. We shall do so when the Madrid conditions are fulfilled. They are not fulfilled yet.
Mr. John Gorse! Number two, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Gorse!
Does my right honourable friend recall that at the end of last week she said she had received a message from the electors of mid-Staffordshire? Would she, in her characteristically forthright fashion, send a message back to them to the effect that, local difficulties apart, this government has a lot of important business to transact in the next few months, and that when it has been dispatched, they will certainly wish to dispatch the temporary representative?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think my honourable friend has got it absolutely right. We shall hope and expect to win that constituency back in the general election, as we have won previous by-election back previously.
Mrs. Ray Mickey!
I refer the honourable lady to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mrs. Mickey!
What message of hope does the Prime Minister have for the hard-pressed and beleaguered Scottish fishing industry? Is she going to allow this vital and indigenous industry to go to the wall like so many others have?
The honourable lady is very well aware that part of the fishing grounds have really been overfished, and the need is to conserve the fish. And although that in recent months the fishermen have not been able to land the same weight of fish as previously, they have been getting very much better prices for it. We are, of course, closely in touch with the Commission and watching very carefully the effect on the common fisheries policy of the entry of East Germany in, because we must see that they do not, in fact, take take a quota which we really regard as ours.
Hazelhurst!
Can my right honourable friend say whether the unequivocal assurance given by the government in the airport's white paper in 1985 that there would not be a second runway at Stansted is as unequivocal now as it was then?
Mr. Speaker, I have no reason to think there has been any change whatsoever in that.
Mr. Ernie Ross!
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Ross!
Does the Prime Minister agree with the view of the Secretary of State for Scotland that the disastrous mishandling of the poll tax issue in the budget was a victory for him over her, or, in his words, on this issue, she fell in line with his better judgment?
No, Mr. Speaker, it showed how very generous are the resources available to Scotland for some £9,500 million, which enabled him easily to take some £4 million, indeed, to help people who've been on community charge longer than in England.
Mr. Michael Colvin!
May I ask my right honourable friend to imagine that the community charge had been in operation for the past 100 years?
Order! Takes a lot of time.
If that were so, what does my right honourable then think that householders would be saying to one another if the government was just about to introduce a system of household domestic rates?
I think that my honourable friend has a very clever point. My imagination does not go back 100 years, but I think he's got the essential point that rates were the most unfair and unpopular tax of all, and they are now being replaced by a fairer tax, which in time will prove very much better.
Dale Campbell Savers. Number 5, sir.
The honourable gentleman to reply which I gave some moments ago.
Campbell Savers.
Mr. Speaker, last night the former Chancellor of the Exchequer and the honourable gentleman, the member for Henley, both refused to support the Prime Minister in the division lobbyists in a division on the poll tax, despite the fact that only hours previously the honourable gentleman, the member for Henley, had been driven into a loyalty oath in favour of the Prime Minister. What does she think of those two honourable gentlemen now? Does she believe the loyalty oath was hollow? And is this the first time that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has expressed a reservation on the poll tax?
Mr. Speaker, I think I must ask my right honourable friend, the Patronage Secretary, to have a quiet word with them and see what that will do.
Roger Gale!
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend recognise...
I think it's finished. Mr. Roger Gale.
I haven't got a number.
Supplementary.
Supplementary.
Right, carry on.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend recognise that because of her special relationship with Mr. Gorbachev, she is better placed than any other world leader to send a clear message to the Soviet Union that armed intervention in Lithuania is no more acceptable today than it was in Czechoslovakia and Hungary. And will she please do so?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend will be aware of the replies which I have given previously. The people of Lithuania have made clear their wish to determine their own future. Further, we have never recognised the annexation of Lithuania to the Soviet Union as legal, although it was recognised in fact in the Helsinki Accords. Undoubtedly, this is a very difficult situation, both for President Gorbachev and the people of Lithuania. I believe it calls for great restraint on both sides. Force is not an appropriate way to settle this position, and I hope that it will in fact be settled by restraint on both sides and by them discussing it so they come to a satisfactory conclusion. That was the view also taken by the 12 foreign secretaries of the community.
Mr. Mike Watson.
Number 6, sir.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware of the statement by the Secretary of State for Scotland over the weekend to the effect that he had been involved in politics prior to her becoming leader of her party and would continue to be so involved when she was no longer the leader of her party. Does the Prime Minister not think it more likely that the general election will in fact sound the death knell of both simultaneously?
My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland, is a young and able man. I'm sure he will be here. So I'm sure he will be here. I'm sure he will still be here at this dispatch box in a Conservative government long after I am not.
Kenneth Hind!
Number 7, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
The Hind!
My right honourable friend is aware of the high-spending councils like Lancashire that have levied 17.5% increases in their expenditure this year. Does she not agree that they are playing their part in increasing inflation, must recognise their role as such, and must look very carefully at their finances with a view to restraining their increases next year?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. There and a number of other Labour authorities are accepting some of the advice given in one of the Labour documents to set the community charge as high as they could possibly get away with, and that, I believe, is what they have done. It does indeed add to inflation, and it puts a very, very heavy burden on all of their local electors, who will have to pay far more community charge than they ought to had they adhered to the standard spending recommendations of the government.
Sir David Alton.
Number 8, sir.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Speaker, returning to the answer the Prime Minister gave a few moments ago, will she say in what ways the Lithuanian people should show restraint, given that since 1939 their country has been annexed by the Soviet Union, forcibly occupied by the Soviet Union, and that the aggression in Lithuania now is coming entirely from the Soviet Union? Doesn't she recognise that the government of President Landsbergis should now be recognised as the government of that country?
I would have thought the honourable gentleman would have agreed that the situation there is very difficult indeed, that it will not help to be provocative in any way on either side, and that the only way is for both groups of people to sit down and try to work things through by dialogue and come to a satisfactory settlement. We had hope last night when we saw people in Lithuania and people in the Red Army sitting down together that they were well on the way to doing that. It does require it between the politicians, and we would support that dialogue, and so does the whole of the European community.
Table!
Would my right honourable friend care to contemplate that during the 1980s, shops and hotels had to put the customer first with fewer people? Factories had to produce more with a smaller workforce, and even the professions had to learn that the world did not revolve around them. But for the local authorities, the party has gone merrily on. Is there any earthly reason why that should be so?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes his own point very effectively. Output has gone up in factories and in offices with fewer people, and that is the way we have, in fact, had a higher standard of living. Unfortunately, in local authorities, the numbers employed by local authorities have continued to go up, and we have reason to ask if they cannot do better administration with fewer people, and that will bring down the community charge.
Kate Hoey.
Number 9, sir.
Honourable lady to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Miss Kate Hoey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with her honourable friend and supporter, the honourable member for Henley, in his recent radio interview where he called for the police to sweep the homeless off the street and to close Cardboard City? Would she like to tell us where she thinks he might be sweeping them?
Mr. Speaker, there are now some 21,000 hostel places available in the London area, far many more than there used to be, of which about 3,000 are available at short notice. They are not always filled, and I think it would be far better if people spent the night in those hostels, in those beds, than on the streets of the City of London. She will be aware that some 250 million... recently made available to help the homeless, and recently 148 million of that was made available for London and the South East, some to local authorities and some to housing associations to help resolve this problem. That is a very considerable sum.
Statement, Mr.